but this is the second part of the deliberation session regarding the 6 Fairground Roads workforce affordable housing proposals. And we're continuing the deliberations from the 6/27 meeting. I'll mention that this is being recorded. We have in the room the review committee, in addition to just a few audience members and some support team members. On the phone, our town council, John Giorgio and Vicki Marsh, as well as Ed Marchand, again, a support team member to this project. You have a few things in front of you. First of all, the summary of the evaluations that we went through at the last session in terms of the grading you each gave to the proposals on the individual evaluative criteria, as well the composite score for each of those as the group discussed and agreed to at that point. The one area that we did not have information in order to assign scores to was the references and site visits. As you all probably have seen, and printouts are at your stations, I did have an opportunity to visit sites constructed by each of the proposers. As well, I've had an opportunity to speak to at least one reference for each of the proposers. I'm happy to go into as much detail as you would like, but I'll, in summary, say at each of the site visits, I was able to walk up and speak to a resident of each of the projects, and in each and every case, the residents of all 3 proposers' developments are very happy with their situation. They're happy with the quality of the work done by the developer and the constructing agent. The one thing that did stand out was that the ongoing management company is a very important consideration. In one case, there was dissatisfaction with the ongoing manager. In the other 2 cases, they're clearly doing a very good job. As well as you can see in the reference calls, basically high marks for everyone from the parties that I had the opportunity to speak to. They all received a 9 out of 10 from the references. They all indicated they would be eager to work with the parties again in each case. Again, I can go into more detail, but that's sort of the top line from those exercises. Are there questions about the visits or references? So,
Tucker, which one did you say was the for the management company?
Yeah, so in the case of the Women's Institute project in Old Saybrook, Connecticut, which is a 23-unit project, partly veteran, partly affordable workforce. I was able to speak to one of the residents. They were very happy with the quality of their apartment and the development, but they said it's been a real fight with the management company, which is called DeMarco Management there, to get them to do the basic maintenance of lawn mowing, mulching, snow removal, the sort of basic things you would expect. So they're dissatisfied with DeMarco, but very satisfied with Women's Institute and the other parties that were involved.
Do they have an on-site person at that property at 22 units? Probably not.
There's not an on-site manager. Yeah. John, and feel free to jump in at any point here, but I kind of at this point like to turn it over to Ed, Marchand, and Laura to discuss a little bit of further analysis on the financial feasibility, subsidies, and unit mix. And you've got a couple of documents in front of you, which Ed had sent this morning that he's going to walk us through.
Yeah, that's fine, because the only thing I would mention is when we last spoke on the conference call, we did not do any ratings on references and site visits, so at some point we should do that. Assign the rating to each one of them.
We should, for sure. Should we do that now, John?
Sounds to me like they're all gonna be pretty high.
It would seem to
Probably
me
gonna be
that
the
since you
same.
did it, Tucker, we should hear what you have to say and probably adopt yours. Unless anybody has a different idea.
I mean, I'm not sure I can elaborate too much further. I was very impressed with the construction, just observing from the outside, and actually I did get to walk through one of the interior units. I did get to walk into the lobbies and so forth. I was very impressed with the work that was done. More importantly, the residents were all very happy. The AmeriCorps gentleman who I spoke with at the development in Lawrence, said, I feel lucky to live here. Another couple who lived at the project in New Bedford basically said, I was offered a much higher paying job in Cambridge and I decided not to move because I really like my living situation here. And similarly, the veteran I mentioned at the Women's Institute project, they all really were very favorable. And as well, the references basically gave their top score. They said, I don't give 10s, but, I would give them a 9, and they all would work with each of the parties again.
So would you say they're all highly advantageous then?
In my own opinion, yeah. I probably would say that. The caveat, I would say that. I would say that. Yeah. They all had good experiences.
And DeMarco, they're just a regional management company?
Yeah, that's the local management company, so it just, to me, highlights the importance of emphasizing the ongoing management plan here.
Which I don't think we have a rating for the proposal on who's going to do the management, do we?
Well, in each case, they talk about potentially who's doing the management, but the agreement is not in place at this point.
Well, I thought Halkeen was doing it themselves.
Yeah, they do it in-house. They're vertically integrated. The other two have proposed using a local service provider. Yeah.
And Women's is going to have someone on site, correct?
They talked about having an on-site manager, yes.
And the other ones were not going to.
Correct.
So I think those are the differentiations of those 3 points.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I mean, it sounds like the quality of the construction and all of that, everybody's pretty much equal. The issue's going to come, how well was it managed?
Yeah.
Should we put that into one of our ratings and discuss that at some point? It's got to fall in somewhere.
It's in the experience of it.
Yeah,
Experience.
There you go.
So we've basically already done that.
So reference and site visit is what we're talking about here.
Sounds like it's a push.
So we're kind of adding HA to each score.
Do we need to go around, John, or can we just take a vote or
No,
something?
I think if there's consensus that they're all highly advantageous on both, I think that's fine, as long as it's memorialized by Tucker. You can absolutely his job. Is there some recharge that you provide?
I mean, one thing I'll mention is I was supposed to speak to the Director of Planning and Housing for New Bedford, and interestingly, 2 of the applicants both listed this party as a reference. He had to push our appointment beyond today. But I can do a confirmatory and just let you know what that discussion was like.
So is that our consensus,
Yeah.
HA, for everybody, or
Everybody good
does
with that?
anybody want to change? So the consensus is HA, John, so,
On references and site visit.
yep,
On both, for all 3, on both references and site visits, correct?
yep.
All right. I think if that's the consensus, Tucker, can you add that to your chart?
Yep.
Okay. So now we have to hear from Ed. Okay, and at the last meeting, you had asked me to give a brief overview of the tax credit program. Would you still like me to do that?
Yes?
Okay. The long-term housing tax credit has been probably the most important federal housing program. It began in 1986 with the Tax Reform Act of 86. Very briefly, what it does, it allows tax credit investors, i.e. primarily corporations now with high tax liabilities, to invest in projects, tax credit, so-called tax credit projects sponsored under Section 42 of the Internal Revenue Code. And they buy into a project, and in fact, they buy 99.9% of the project normally, and they receive primarily two benefits. They get tax credits, and of course, a tax credit is a dollar for dollar offset of a tax liability. Plus, corporations, but not individuals, also can benefit from the tax shelter. They have a right to any cash flow generated, but they don't really, when they price what they're willing to pay, don't include any significant cash flow in their projections. The sponsoring entity has to create, most normally today, an LLC, limited liability company, to be the ownership entity, and the members, the tax credit member will have a 99.9%. The beauty of the LLC ownership entity, of course, the profits and losses are passed through to the members. It does not pay taxes twice. And what a developer has to do is normally engage with a syndicator who identifies a buyer of the tax credits. The price that a tax credit buyer is willing to pay is normally based upon an internal rate of return model. That's fairly complicated, so it's normally reduced down to how much is a tax credit investor willing to pay per dollar of tax credit. Tax credit is allocated based upon a competition. The demand greatly exceeds the supply. The allocating agency here in Massachusetts is the Department of Housing and Community Development. Each allocating agency has to prepare a plan for how it intends to distribute its credits. What are the priorities for the state? That is called a QAP, a Qualified Allocation Plan. There's a sort of a qualification round and then a funding round. But again, I can't emphasize that it is extremely competitive on every competition. That's sort of my overview of the tax credits. The most common buyer today is a bank. The reason it's a bank is that they get an additional benefit. They get to use the tax credit. They get to use the shelter. But in addition, they get benefits because a low-income housing tax credit qualifies as a community redevelopment, a CRA benefit, and that's very important to banks. Therefore, banks normally have been willing to pay more for tax credits than other normal C Corps. Are there any questions?
Yeah, how much are they getting per dollar? What is the return they're hoping to get?
Through that on my chart.
Yeah, which number?
We can go right into
92?
the chart that talks about best case alternative, worst case alternative. And I had some concern on the pro forma because each of the developers was using a per unit basis, the best credit basis number that greatly exceeded the maximum number included in the state's qualified allocation plan. So however, I am less concerned about that now because my understanding is, from good sources, that on a project-by-project basis, DHCD will consider tax basis amounts that exceed the 250,000 per unit and 200,000 per unit number that I'm going to talk about. And that's very important because, in fact, the number that each of these developers is basing its tax credit equity on greatly exceeds the 250,000, let alone the 200,000 number. And that number is about 360,000 before something known as a basis boost. I thought it was important to do this chart so that you're on record as recognizing that their sources of funds are based upon an approval from DHCD to exceed the limits listed in the qualified allocation plan. And that you're not going to be sympathetic if they come back and say, well, DHCD didn't approve that, so we need additional funding from the town. So let me walk through it and I'll explain how much they've assumed they're going to be able to get from tax credit investors per dollar of tax credit. My first case is the best case alternative. And in the QAP, DHCD says that the basis should not exceed $250,000. However, that's for projects within Boston, the Boston metro area. Nantucket is not within the Boston metro area. However, Nantucket has been determined to be a DDA. A DDA is a difficult to develop area. If your project is located in a DDA, you can increase the basis amount by 30%. So I begin with 250,000 times 130%. That gets me up to $325,000. That's the number upon which the tax credit is based. The federal program says we will give you a 9% credit for applying to the base. 325,000 times 9% is 29,250, and you get that for 10 years. So the sum of the credits on a per unit basis is $292,500. The Hall-Keene proposal assumed that their investors would pay 92 cents per credit. So that results in a credit of about $270,000 per unit. The Women's Institute was more aggressive. They thought they could get 98 cents a credit for $286,000 per unit based upon the actual $250,000 cap. The yield had actually exceeded $1, believe it or not, but with the rumors of a tax change, which would reduce the tax rate to possibly as low as 20%, the value of the tax shelter component of the tax credit decreased. Therefore, yields are lower. And it remains to be seen what will happen in terms of that proposed tax change. So that would be the best case. The worst case, if you don't get relief from DHCD, would be that they apply the $200,000 limit, given that Nantucket is located outside the Boston metro area. You still get the 130% basis boost, but you can, if you follow that through, you can see that there's a significant difference. The 215 versus 269, the 229 versus 286. However, that's all out the window if in fact DHCD agrees to allow the developer to exceed those limitations. Keene and Women's Institute are very close in terms of the actual basis number that they use in their sources and uses of fund statement. Paul Keene was at rounded $359,000 before the basis boost, and Women's Institute was at $362,000. Now you'll note that I did this only on the Paul Keene and Women's Institute project. The reason I did that is if you take a look at the total development cost, and the review board stated this itself, that almost $10 million gap between the Gideon Platt project and the Hall Keene and Women's Institute project, to me, is not a credible, the Gideon Platt total development cost is not a credible number. The cost per unit would be $246,000. My experience on working in projects without having to live with the inefficiencies of an island economy are at $246,000 or higher. So I've not done a more detailed analysis of the Gideon Platt proposal. The next page just shows what the problem would be if you don't get a waiver from DHCD. And I'm not sure if I call it a waiver or an approval. Doesn't matter. But if you go to my right-hand column in bold, then those are the funding gaps that would be created. So I think, when you do make your selection, you want to remind these developers that it's their hunt to be able to get approval to use the higher limits that they included in their pro forma. There are a couple of other comments in terms of the tax credit program. There is a strict federal threshold requirement that any tax credit project has to have at least 20% of its units affordable to households at or below 50%, or 40% of its units affordable to households at or below 60%. If you go to my third handout, or the third page, distribution of units by unit type and income tier, you'll see that I've broken up the units by bedroom type and by income tier. And on the Hall Keene proposal, you'll see that it has not satisfied that 40% requirement. And that's not something that DHCD can grant a waiver on. So Hall Keene will have to increase the number of units that are affordable at 60% of area median income or below, from 22 units to 26 units. They're going to have to add 4 more units. But if you take a look at the right-hand column, one of the state requirements that I think DHCD would hesitate to grant any relief on is that any project receiving state assistance in certain tax credits as state assistance, considered state assistance, would need to have at least 10% of the units be 3-bedroom units. So they're close, but close doesn't count. They would have to add one additional 3-bedroom unit. One other requirement for the tax credit program that I don't think DHCD would waive is that within the tax credit units, at least 10% of those units have to be affordable to households at or below 30%. You can see on my table that the Hall Keene proposal has only 2. In fact, they're going to have to increase that to 3. The Women's Institute did satisfy the 20% and 50%. The other complication be 2-bedroom or larger units. And within that, 10% must be 3-bedroom units. The Hall Key proposal comes relatively close to that at 59.3%. And when they get that extra 3-bedroom unit, assuming it doesn't come out of a 2-bedroom unit, they'll be relatively close. The Women's Institute has only 50%. However, my guess is that given that the town made a specific request for smaller units, studio and 1-bedroom units, DHCD would take that into consideration. So there certainly are some approvals above and beyond the normal approvals that each of these two developers would need to get from DHCD. I'm going to now just give you a brief overview, and Laura, jump in whenever necessary, of the subsidy or the sources of funding for each of these two projects.
Any question?
Ed, could you hold for a minute? I think there are a couple of questions.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Ed, Matt Fee here. I'm just wondering what these numbers, these changes on the numbers that we're talking about for Hal Kane, what impact will that have on their, on their financials, and what impact might that have on the potential funding gap or any of those issues when they make these changes?
In terms of Hall Keen of increasing the number of units at below 60%, it will clearly have an impact because they're going to have to make, I assume, the 120% units, 4 of those be affordable at 60%. However, that's going to be offset because now they're going to be able to get tax credits on those. Their tax credit application or assumption assumed only 22 units, now they get 26. So I'm going to say, without doing a comparison of the 120% rent versus the 60% rent, that it will have no material impact, and Laura and I might think that in fact there might be a benefit to that. Because you need to just take a look at the incremental rent, and that per unit tax credit subsidy versus the $100,000 workforce housing subsidy. So I do not think it'll have any material impact.
Do you view these two similarly then, from a financial, from what you're talking about? Do you view these two similarly?
These two alternatives are the Hall Keen versus Women.
Hall Keen versus Women. Do you view them similarly?
Well, let me go through the sources of financing if I could.
Okay.
Because that's where I want to point out differences. I think what was important for me was to see, do these proposals meet federal requirements? Take a look at the third row on the distribution of units. There's another very important federal requirement. And that federal requirement says, if you're going to do 20% of your units at 50% or 40 at 60%, then the amount of square footage for the affordable units has to be based on a pro rata basis. You can't take the tax credit units and say, we're going to make all the small units tax credit units and make the larger units market rate units. If you don't meet that test, then the actual allocation of tax credit units will be reduced based upon that ratio of the square footage of your affordable units to the total square footage in the project. And I did a quick check. The only real way to do this is to look at each of the units and check the square footage. I made an assumption that the studio affordable units or tax credit units will have the same square footage as the market rate units. I didn't go into sort of the more detailed analysis to see if there was any differentiation. I'm not sure there is. average number of bedrooms on the Hall Keen proposal for the tax credit units is 1.76, which is higher than it is on the non-LIHTC unit. So my guess is they satisfy that per rider square footage requirement. On the Women's Institute, however, the average bedroom count is less than it is on the non-LIHTC unit, so there might be a bit of an issue, and they might have to make some adjustments on how they've allocated the units. In terms of the all units, the bedroom count is pretty similar, 1.64 to 1. Average number of bedrooms per unit is pretty similar, 1.64 versus 1.58. Now, to me, what was important, and remember, these are pro formas. Nobody really knows what it's going to cost, especially when the project's on Nantucket. However, I think that both proponents have received construction cost estimates, which is clearly the most important line item in a pro forma, from companies that are experienced in doing business on the island. Paul Keen has Williams Construction. They have a lot of experience on the Cape and experience on the island. And Women's Institute, which is using Delbrook Scanlon, which has similar experience. The other items, I didn't see anything sort of unusual that I would call out. And they're pretty similar. One's at $426,000 per unit, one's at $413,000. If I wanted to review it more closely, I'd separate out reserves and make a better apples-to-apples comparison. But overall, I think they're credible statements of what it might cost to build the units as proposed on the island. The Hall Keen project has some additional costs in terms of the elevators, but given the building type, they're going to have some economies of scale in terms of foundations, roofs, and other certain fixed cost items. I was more interested in having made that conclusion to look at what the sources of funds are. And the first source you look at is, well, this is old-fashioned real estate, and your loan amount is based upon your net operating income. How much money would a lender be willing to lend you? And on the Hall Keen, it was about $12 million. On the Women's Institute, it was $13.2 million. Pretty close, and that will be a function of the debt service coverage funds, the factor that each of these applicants used, and the interest rate, and therefore the annual constant that they used. And they weren't exactly the same, so this is not a straight apples-to-apples comparison. Then you take a look at what are the major subsidies. And the LIHTC subsidy for Hall Keen is significantly higher, but that's because they have more tax credit units. And in fact, that will increase. They were at $8.5 million. And in addition to the federal tax credit, Hall Keen is assuming that they will be able to get an allocation of state tax credits. So that was another $1.9 million there. Women's Institute did not go after state tax credits. As Laura knows, those funds are very scarce. I've been told that those are the most stressed, that's the most stressed funding source at DHCD at this time. Both projects are looking for subsidies from Mass Housing Finance Agency for the so-called workforce housing units. Hall Keen has 29 of those units. The suggested maximum per unit is $100,000, although Mass Housing has done more per unit. That's $2.9 million for Hall Keen, and a very large number, because there are 50 units, $5 million. And Laura's got some homework on the availability of workforce housing. Laura, do you want to chime in there?
Yeah, right now, mass housing is overprescribed on the workforce housing money. They have allocated.
Could you come over?
Sorry. Mass housing is overprescribed on the workforce housing money. They had allocated $10 million for this program. Indications are that if and when they run out of money, they'll put more money in, but they are not taking applications right now for new. They're overprescribed, but there's a lot of big projects that may not go forward, so it's kind of a wait and see. So it's a little too early to say this isn't going to be available, but it is one of those where it's not a done deal. You couldn't count on it. But
Now, having worked in this industry for 40 years, if you said, I'm not going to sort of work on projects because there's no funding, you will never have built a project in your life.
Right.
So what you do is and what I also say is, if you work on a project and the fundamentals are sound, you may have to wait a year, you may have to wait 2 years, but if you've got a good development team, a good site, a good design, a good contractor, and a good property manager, sooner or later, you're going to get funded. So my expectation is, well, I think it's going to be easy to get $2.9 million than $5 million because the $5 million is a pretty big ask for workforce housing.
And I just would add that also in the favor is that you have a municipality that is donating land, and that always boosts your standing with DHCD.
Absolutely. DHCD is looking for a local contribution. It is very important to receive any of their funding. But just to recap on Hall-Keene, they're going to get $12 million of real mortgage funding, i.e. debt where you have to pay the interest, and if you don't, you get foreclosed. They're going to ask for $2.9 million of workforce housing, and that workforce housing program is a good program because you don't pay any interest on that money. At some point, you will have to repay that principal amount, but that is long into the future. They have 8.5 of federal tax credits and 1.9 of state tax credits. And as is customary in affordable housing projects, the state and the feds allow you to include a pretty healthy development fee and overhead line item. That inflates the development cost, but what you do is you simply defer the payment of that and pledge that as equity in the project. So basically it's a wash. And for Hall-Keene, it's $1.9 million. They're pledging their full amount. The Women's Institute is, if you look at the sources of funding, it is different. It's $5.4 million of federal tax credits. They are not looking for state tax credits. $5 million of workforce, as we had discussed, and they're looking for an additional $2 million of soft funding from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and the Housing Innovations Fund. Their conventional debt is 13.2, i.e. real debt, and they're deferring about $850,000 of their development fee. If you added all that up, it would come to their total uses, $27.3 million for Hall-Keene, $26.4 million for Women's Institute.
And I just want to clarify, in case there's any uncertainty, that when you're talking about the Affordable Housing Trust Fund there, that's the state Affordable Housing Trust Fund, not...
Yes,
Yeah.
Good question. Neither of these developers is looking for any additional funding from Nantucket, unlike the Gideon Plant proposal, I believe. However,
Just-
also in the history of my work history with affordable housing, don't be surprised if at some point they try to get more money. Would not be unusual, and therefore I think you made it clear in the proposal, and I think how he made an affirmative statement that they were not going to be looking for any additional funding beyond the below market week.
Yeah, David Worth, just to be clear, on the sources statement I'm looking at, there's a developer's cash equity number of 5.4 million. Is that the LIHTC?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the LIHTC for Women's Institute.
Ed, this is Doug. If they have trouble gaining some of the subsidy dollars, either party, the mix of affordable and then you will workforce and market rate is skewed towards workforce and market as compared to affordable. So if they were to increase the number of LIHTC units at the expense of the workforce or market rate, is that likely to produce more federal benefit, which would make the project more feasible? In other words, is a solution to a funding shortfall to increase affordability?
It is with 120%, I could do a relatively simple analysis. I should have done it actually for this meeting. I didn't do it because I know what the 120% rents are. Tucker and I have been trying to get a better feel for what the market rents will be in Nantucket. And we thought that would be relatively easy because Richmond Companies is doing a 28-unit project which should be getting certificates of occupancy late summer, early fall, and therefore you would expect them to begin rent up anytime now. I was able to speak with a representative of that company, Patty Roggeveen, but they have not set their market rents yet. And once we know that, then we could do the calculus that shows what's better, in terms of bottom line, a tax credit unit, 120% unit, or a market rate unit. And remember, as a tax credit developer, you would prefer to do a tax credit project with a gap between the allowable tax credit rent and the market rent is small, because you don't leave rent on the table. However, let's say you were doing a tax credit project in Cambridge. Well, the market rent there might be $2,800 per unit, and the tax credit rent is $1,800. So there's a gap of $1,000 times 12,000 divided by your annual cost. And you say, well, how much more mortgage could I service at that? So that's the analysis that needs to be done. I am concerned that the market rate units, that the market rates are going to be quite high. But we really don't have any good market rate comps for new construction units in Nantucket. And Tucker, you may want to chime in here because I know you've been trying hard to get these numbers.
I would think they're pretty similar to what you're saying for Cambridge. I would say market rate year-round rents here for a newly constructed unit would be very comparable with the city.
120% rents would be, and the 120% rents based upon the 2017 income limits are $2,091 for a studio, $2,240 for a one-bedroom, $3688 for a 2-bedroom and $3105 for a 3-bedroom. However, when I look at the market rate numbers, it looks to me like they simply backed into the market rate numbers by dividing those numbers by 0.85. So I don't know if the market rate numbers that they showed on their pro forma are real or not real.
And it's Laura. The Hall Keene used 140% AMI for market rate.
Oh, okay.
Looking at town employees, that was a justification in their proposal. I do want to say though, concerning the rents, neither proposal used correct rents across the board. The rents didn't. Mostly they were too low, but some of them were too high also. At least on the charts that are published. So neither one of them used correct rents, which would affect how much debt they could have, especially because most of them were too low. So I think they could support more debt.
And it is important to understand that the tax credit units, the rents there include all utilities or a utility allowance. All of the other units, none of the other units, in the 80% units for Women's Institute must include all utilities in order to be eligible for listing on the subsidized housing inventory, which is in order to have all the units. So, and I know that's a key objective of the town. The 100, 110, 120, and market rate units do not include utilities. So in thinking about these rents, you have to add utilities to them.
I thought in those two proposals, most of the utilities were inclusive, where in Gideon Platt's proposal, they intended to separately meter.
Any other questions for me?
Oh, am I remembering that correctly?
There was a question about the proposals and including rents. One of them included most of the utilities, but there was some electricity, and the other one had utility allowances. I can't remember which is which, but I have it written down.
The question David here, the question I have is, the town goes forward with whatever proposer, and either the tax credit dollars aren't what is outlined in their sources, and they come up with holes. What's their legal obligation to go forward with the project? And where would the town find themselves if these holes exist? Are we looking at them coming to the town with the threat that they can't do the project unless we give them more money? Just what sort of situation does the town find themselves in if that situation arises?
Before I asked you for more money, I wanted to do everything I could to reduce my costs. And you do the normal value engineering, but normally that's not enough to solve the problem. And then I would develop scenarios which would result, based upon the analysis, which is the question Doug asked, is there a unit mix here? Would I be better off with more tax credits, assuming tax credits is not the problem, with a different mix? My concern always is they're going to say, look, we were trying to expand affordability here, but all we can do is the basic threshold, enough to get you qualified to count all of the units on the subsidized housing inventory. And then I would ask you for additional subsidy funding. I don't think, and it would not be wise to require a developer to proceed. I don't think there's any legal obligation to proceed with the project. What you want, you just don't want it to linger. You should have some milestone that says if you can't sort of proceed to an initial closing within X date, we have the right to revoke your designation. And that's important because, one, you want to set up some deadlines, and you want to motivate, I mean, obviously you want deadlines to motivate the developer, and you don't want to, I'm not sure affordable housing is going to get any easier. You don't want this sitting around, getting stale.
This is Doug.
Ed, thank you, Mr. Marsh. So you're on track as far as trying to set up some deadlines for them. Generally, what will happen is once you've awarded this proposal to either any of the developers, we would have them execute a land development agreement, and we would proceed within that land development agreement, there would be certain deadlines for either obtaining your financing, obtaining all the permits, and then a closing date. And so generally what happens is if they're not able to obtain their tax credits, they don't get awarded certain subsidies from certain subsidy programs, we can also build an extension. So, for instance, I've done some projects where they have an additional 1-year extension that will be granted, or you can have 2 1-year extensions that would be granted. Again, so as I said, you don't want the project to languish for, an indefinite period of time. However, my experience has been, we think that the project is going to get all these funding and permits and approvals within, 18 months, and that just doesn't happen. And so, very often there are extensions that are built in.
Housing are on a short leash, and there are certain objective standards. For example, assuming the zoning is in order, they must submit a pre-qualification application to DHCD for tax credit. That's going to be the first real test here. And they need to, it has to be a good faith effort. They need to give you a copy of the application. And then you sort of extend it to the next funding round. And you don't give them extensions beyond that. Then you see what happens there. And that's the way you do it. But again, the norm would be that you do not get funded on your first attempt to get tax credit, given that the demand is so great and that there have been other projects that had applied in the last or the next to the last funding round. That's why, from the town's perspective, making a decision on this in a timely manner and taking care of whatever zoning approvals are necessary, and again, this is designed pretty much to be a development by right, is critical so that they can make the strongest possible application to DHCD.
Yeah, this is Doug. I could just add one thing that basically developers who do this kind of work are in the begging business. It's called layered financing. And so what they're doing is piecing together different sources of subsidy dollars. That could be nonprofit donations that would come in. And they're always dealing with this gap. And at this point in time, we don't know exactly how it's going to come out. So what you're really counting on and you're relying upon is the professionalism and the experience of the team in being able to cobble together the subsidy dollars that are required to fill the gap, because they're highly motivated to get this done. But that's just, I think that's the nature of given where we are and how much we still don't know about how this thing is going to get financed.
That's exactly the way it works.
Yeah, I also wanted to add that if you look at what's been proposed for sources of use, sources by both parties, there are other subsidy sources out there that, for instance, Halkeen didn't go to any of the other soft money at DHCD that they could tap into. There's other sources that Women's Institute didn't tap into because they didn't have to be based on their pro forma and their assumptions. So there are other options rather than coming to the town next.
have a question. This is John. Based upon your analysis, do you see any reason to adjust the ratings for either one of these proposals that we did a couple weeks ago? Basically on the affordability component? I don't think so. You can see from my chart that obviously Women's Institute offers restricted rents on all of their units, which is a difference from Haltine, because Haltine has 13 market rate units, but I don't see that as a reason to modify that rating. I think Haltine's going to get a little bit better in terms of affordability because they have no choice but to add 4 more tax credit units.
Yeah, John, this is Tucker. Just I had the chance to watch the video of the last session, and obviously be putting together some of this commentary for the ultimate memo, presuming there's a recommendation coming out of the group. But I believe that the Women's Institute and GP Properties received the advantageous rating in this category for different reasons. One, because they didn't include any market, and the other, it was light on affordable. Paul Keene seemed to have struck like the best mix in the minds of the committee at that last meeting, and I don't know that Ed's analysis changed those factors.
No, it did not.
It didn't change it for me.
I mean, given I have to say this, it might be beyond my role, but given the degree of difficulty, as Doug mentioned and Laura has mentioned, that very often you're looking for the best horse to ride. That's the way I like to describe it. In terms of who is going to be able to put together a proposal that is most likely to be able to secure these subsidies. And that's what I think that's a major factor that the review committee and the Board of Selectmen should take into consideration.
And then who is that then?
Yeah,
We don't know. I don't know that. How do I make a decision on that? It's Matt Fee.
I think you have to sort of carefully review the proposals and look at the past history and level of experience and quality of the development team. And again, I think property management is a very important factor in this. I know property management is a critical factor in long-term economic sustainability of a project. So Ed, it seems to me that when Tucker was putting together this memo, which will be from the committee to the Board of Selectmen, that will analyze or be the narrative as to why each proposal was rated the way it was. I think that memo should contain an analysis of, for example, that whole team's going to have to adjust its array of units in order to be eligible for the tax credits, and use that document as a vehicle for really putting both of these developers on notice, but primarily the one who winds up being the most advantageous. That those are what the town's expectations are in terms of their ability within a year or two or whatever it is to be able to obtain the necessary credits that are underlying their proposals. You said something in your presentation that struck me as being critical, and I just wanted to make sure I understood what you were saying. But I thought you said it might take 1 to 2 years but that each one of these would likely get funded because they're solid projects? Did I say that? It's a general statement, John, based upon my years of experience, that fundamentally sound projects get funded. Now you can ask me, do I think that these two are fundamentally sound? Correct. And I think that they are. The weakness to me with Women's Institute is their experience from a Cape in the island and the lack of a designated property manager. Paul Keene, on the other hand, has had direct experience in Nantucket and has had much more development experience, and I think a much deeper bench in terms of staff. I think you really have to look at the staff for each of these entities, because ultimately the most important person getting this done is the person who's going to serve as the project manager for the project. So you need to look at the named project manager and the resume and the experience of each of those persons. Just like hiring somebody, you want to know, okay, that's fine. Who's going to do this work and who's going to supervise the work? So picking up on, I believe it was Matt's concern about how do we really conduct this, make this judgment call about the ultimate financeability of these projects. I don't think we do that at this point. I think we described in that memo what the town's expectations are, and that will form the basis for a pretty tight, clear set of deadlines in the LDA, so that if they don't, if either they come back to the town for more funding or they don't meet those benchmarks, then we basically cut the bait. And as long as that's well articulated, I think the town would be on a solid basis for. I'll now change my metaphor and pull the plug on a project if things don't work out the way they are expecting to, in terms of the tax credits and subsidies. So there could be no question down the line that will be in writing what our expectation was based upon their proposals and our analysis. And this project is no different from, I'm going to say, most affordable housing development. It's a hunt for subsidies. This is all about being able to secure those subsidies. Right.
It sounded like there was probably some room for additional borrowing too if they needed it, based on the rental numbers that Laura discussed.
The statement was that there's probably room for extra borrowing based on the rent. Maybe an update on that.
Cash flow.
Yeah.
Net operating income.
Is that on?
Yes. Sorry, I'm not loud enough.
No, that's okay. If Paul Keene, if in fact those market rents exceed 140%, then obviously there'd be more NOI. If there's more NOI, the size of your senior loan would increase. One other important comment is, we talked about the capital cost pro forma. There is a fairly significant difference in terms of the operating pro forma, in terms of the operating budget per unit. And Paul Keene had a higher number than his Women's Institute.
Their units were all
I think
large.
we have that in summary. I'm looking for it. Laura, do you have that number? I thought Paul Keene was in the 11,000 per unit range.
Yeah, Hawkeen was in the 11,000 range, and I'm trying to find Women's
And
Institute.
Women's Institute was, I'm going to say closer to 9 if that.
Right, and with tax credits, what we see at MHP for operating numbers, not looking at the island, per se, it is around, 11. It's about what it is, $11,000 per unit per year to operate. And that's
Yeah,
not,
that's a pretty meaningful difference,
Yeah.
when you think about it.
yeah.
Well, if it's 2,000 times 60 units, it's $100,000, we could support $1.5 million, $2 million in additional financing, if that's correct.
Takes the developer to secure, the tax credits that would be necessary for this project.
I would like to think no more than 2 rounds.
Yeah, I agree.
I worked on one project and was pleasantly surprised in Duxbury that the developer, who was a first-rate developer, highly respected by DHCD, got tax credits on its first application. That is the exception.
Do you-
2 rounds. Because this is a pretty attractive project, I think.
Yeah, do you think
Because
being
the town is
Nantucket?
taking the initiative, you're leasing the land for a nominal amount, and there is a unchallenged real need for housing at all levels in Nantucket.
And it's a relatively low ask for tax credits because it's a low number of units. Typically, it's 40 to 60 units, so you just look at how much more the ask is. So it could be that it's one of those that fits in the leftover money. So in that case, it may get first round, but with all the other positives on it. But I think it'd be no more than
Because it's a
2.
relatively low ask in terms of the number of units,
Yeah.
that may make it easier for DHCD to agree to a higher average maximum basis amount.
Okay.
This may be one of the things that John was referring to go in a memo, depending on the direction here. But I heard at the presentations one of the developers, Hall Keen, say that they would be taking a rifle approach to the funding round, and that this would be their single
Yeah, I
ask for
remember that.
projects in their portfolio until it was successful. And I don't know if that carries actually weight, but
Yeah. Yeah, you
I
can't.
recall that.
Yeah.
I mean, we specifically asked them in the RFP to comment on that.
Well, just based on the rating,
And that's critical.
we
You
have
want that reaffirmed in the L2 land disposition agreement. That this is the only one they're going to go after.
based on the ratings, there's a clear front runner. So, are we ready to make a recommendation?
John, is there anything else we should talk about here before going to that?
Not unless there are any more questions.
I do have a question on how we're going to make additional parking available, because that is a concern.
I'm sorry, John.
How to make additional parking available? I mean, it's for the number 1 and number 2 proposals. I see parking as an issue, and I just didn't know if we wanted to think about that now in terms of a recommendation. I don't know if Andrew had anything.
Well, I think that should be a general direction that would come out in the memo, and I think it's something we would deal with at permitting. Because I see,
I agree with Andrew. That should be in the memo.
yep, because I see
And
some,
in the meantime, I think the town should take a look at that adjacent land and see if that presents any opportunities to solve this and to create more parking.
yeah. I mean, I think there's some design issues too that need to be, I mean, I think there was some weakness in design and parking that are gonna come out in permitting, I think, very clearly. So,
I think we want to be careful about setting aside other land that we're going to need for something else. I think they have the ability to do this on that property, widen the roads a little bit, put on street, put shared parking. And maybe on the backside of the fire station, and that's the overflow for the town building and for this. You know, there's a way to do it that doesn't take, we want to make sure we do it and not take away future housing possibilities on that property. Enough have been precluded by some of the previous siting and things.
I just totally agree with that. We can't squander. We have very little land, and we should not be squandering it. It's that additional lot could be additional housing in the future, and it was one of the main problems with running a road through the other piece that just takes
Agreed.
units away.
So I think, Andrew, if you would, sort of contribute an analysis of what the parking should look like and potential permitting issues that you see. That would also be, I think, a helpful addition to this memo. So going forward from this conference call, what I have heard, and obviously correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't see any basis for changing the composite ratings that were done last week. And it would appear to me that Hull Key is the most advantageous proposal based upon the composite rating. Is there any disagreement on that?
No.
One question, how should we weight one being a nonprofit versus one not being a nonprofit? Or how do we weight that the Women's Institute has more wiggle room if they have to add more affordable units than Halkeen, more market units than Halkeen does? And I think there are a couple advantages in their proposal, and how do we weight those? And I also like that they have on-site management.
Didn't we sort of already rate them in the experience? We just talked about the property management, and maybe we beef that up somehow in the land development agreement or the lease.
I think there's a difference when there's someone living. I know this from my own, 25, kids in 4 buildings. When there's someone living there that's responsible to keep an eye on everything, it goes a lot better than when we didn't. And and this is, these are young kids. This is gonna be not that level, but I do think it's an important aspect.
I don't think we specified in the RFP if there was going to be any preference given to nonprofit versus not nonprofit.
But how do you weigh it? Like weight it? If
I don't think we have it.
Is one more advantageous from an operational standpoint from the experience of people who have done this, or does it not really make a difference?
My experience says it doesn't make a difference. It depends on who they hire as the rental management company. That makes a difference.
It's difficult to evaluate Women's Institute because they don't have a named property manager. And they don't do in-house management. And the last thing you want to do is this is the only project you're managing in terms of being able to build a credible property management organization.
So, John, so do we need like an affirmative vote here in terms of this group votes to make a recommendation of X developer to the Board of Selectmen, subject to the review of the memo which would accompany that recommendation, and that obviously could be put together and circulated for comment and
final
agreement.
vote.
Yeah.
So I think it's up to the committee to decide, do you want to review Tucker's memo first before you make your final recommendation to the Board of Selectmen?
Yes, but I think an interim. I mean, just
Who am I
so,
writing up in the?
who you're writing up.
Right.
We've got to come to some conclusion on that.
That's right, and that's why I said, David, that I thought based upon, Tucker's summary reflects my notes, and I think you would be hard pressed not to rate Halkeen as my most advantageous proposal based upon your own evaluation criteria and the ratings that you assign. And so I suppose one option for the committee would be to affirm at this point to make that determination and direct Tucker to prepare a memo to the Board of Selectmen with that recommendation subject to review by the committee.
I so moved.
Yeah, second.
Second.
Yeah, I mean, it would be ideal if we could have this on the Board of Selectmen agenda for the 19th, so it doesn't have to wait until August 9th.
I mean, I'll start working on the memo right away.
So we need to finalize the memo by the end of the week. Does that
I'm sorry,
seem
was there a vote on
feasible?
that?
We need to
We have
finalize the
to
memo.
vote, but we have a motion which was yours, seconded, and we're talking about a little housekeeping.
Oh, okay.
We could take.
Like Don
we can
wants it
take
on the
vote.
agenda the 19th, so. Is everybody comfortable going in this direction?
Yes.
Okay.
All those in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Great. Well, thank you once again to everybody. I know this is a significant amount of work, and everyone's got a busy schedule, so it's greatly appreciated. I will begin working on the memo right away. I want to particularly thank Laura and Ed and John and Vicki and Brian and Greg for being here and for all of the contributions they've made during this process. So with that, thank you, and we'll get that memo out.
Thank you, folks on the phone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.